First of all, Phase 1 issues don't need to be fully resolved and concluded in order for Phase 2 to open up. So, I mean, what we're talking about here is making sufficient progress so that we can open up Phase 2 in parallel with finalising a lot of the issues that are in Phase 1. So a lot of the Irish issues won't be concluded before Phase 2 begins. But we do need to be satisfied that there is sufficient progress so that we have the confidence to move to Phase 2 to try and get the deal done. And if you want to break up the Irish issues, I think they're quite clear. First of all, the common travel area, and that is the one area where I think there has been a lot of progress, and I think there is a lot of agreement between the two negotiating teams as to what needs to be done there, and what can be agreed early in these negotiations. Secondly, the Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement, and its compatibility with, in terms of implementation, with Britain leaving the European Union. That is proving to be an awful lot more complex than many people realised, because of course the Good Friday Agreement was written on the assumption that both jurisdictions would be within the European Union, and therefore a common regulatory framework and environment would be there in areas like agriculture, food safety, environmental controls, water, and so many other issues. There is a detailed piece of work happening now, scoping out how we deal with the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement in the context of Northern Ireland not being part of the European Union.
And we're talking about 150 areas?
I think it's about 140 areas, yeah. So there are so many different areas, and many of those are written on the assumption of the regulatory environment being the same on both sides of the border. So if that changes, well, then there needs to be a plan to deal with that in terms of equivalence and adherence to regulations and standards, and what happens when the standards change in the European Union. Are those changes mirrored, and so on. So that's a detailed piece of work. We're making some progress on it, but there's more work to be done. And then the third issue, of course, is the border. And the border was always an issue for Phase 1. Not to conclude everything in terms of the challenges that the border poses in the context of Brexit, but certainly we need to see substantial progress in terms of understanding where we are in the context of the border. So the British government has made some very strong statements. They don't want to see any border infrastructure. They want to protect the Good Friday Agreement in full and implement it in full. They're committed to protecting the peace process. But actually, a roadmap to achieve all that is what's required. And I think there is a need for more clarity and a deeper understanding as to how Britain proposes to do that before we can move to Phase 2, which undoubtedly will be part of the solution in relation to the border, I suspect. But without, I think, more clarity on how Britain intends to achieve what they are aspiring to achieve in the Florence speech and in other statements that the Prime Minister has made in the context of Northern Ireland, which sound positive but need a plan to get us there, then I think it's difficult to move on to Phase 2.